It's an emergency.
Susan sat up. Emergency? In crypto? She couldn't imagine. Yes, sir. I'll be there as soon as I can.
Make it sooner.
Strathmore hung up. 30,000 feet above a dead calm ocean, David Becker stared miserably from the Learjet 60's small oval window. He'd been told the phone on board was out of order, and he'd never had a chance to call Susan. What am I doing here? He grumbled to himself. But the answer was simple. There were men to whom you just didn't say no. He pulled the shade and tried to sleep, but he could only think of her. An hour later, Susan's Volvo sedan rolled to a stop in the shadow of a 10-foot-high, barbed cyclone fence. A guard placed his hand on the roof. ID, please. Susan obliged and settled in for the usual half-minute wait. The officer ran her card through a computerized scanner. Finally, he looked up. Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. The gate swung open. As she approached the next checkpoint, a stocky sentry with 2 attack dogs and a machine gun glanced at her license plate and waved her through. She followed the road for 250 yards and pulled into Employee Lot C. She gunned the car into her reserved spot and killed the engine. After crossing the landscaped terrace and entering the main building, she cleared 2 more internal checkpoints and finally arrived at the windowless tunnel that led to the newest wing. National Security Agency, NSA, Crypto Facility, authorized personnel only. As Susan reached the end of the tunnel, a circular vault-like door blocked her way. The enormous letters read, Crypto. Sighing, she placed her hand inside the recessed cipher box and entered her 5-digit PIN. Seconds later, the 12-ton slab of steel began to revolve. She tried to focus, but her thoughts reeled back to him. David Becker, the only man she'd ever loved. The youngest full professor at Georgetown University and a brilliant foreign language specialist, he was practically a celebrity in the world of academia. Born with an eidetic memory and a love of languages, he'd mastered 6 Asian dialects as well as Spanish, French, and Italian. Becker was dark, a rugged, youthful 35 with sharp green eyes and a wit to match. Over 6 feet tall, he moved across a squash court faster than any of his colleagues could comprehend. As with all young professors, David's university salary was modest. From time to time, when he needed to renew his squash club membership or restring his old racket, he earned extra money by doing translating work for government agencies in and around Washington. It was on one of those jobs that he'd met Susan. It was a crisp morning during fall break, when Becker returned from a jog to find his answering machine blinking. The message was like many he received, a government agency requesting his translating services for a few hours later that morning. But Becker had never heard of this organization, the National Security Agency. Puzzled, he called one of his old squash buddies, an ex-political analyst turned research clerk at the Library of Congress. NSA, his buddy joked, stands for No Such Agency. Apparently, the NSA was considered one of the most influential government organizations in the world. It had been gathering global electronic intelligence data and protecting U.S. classified information for over half a century. Only 3% of Americans were even aware it existed. Becker accepted the mysterious agency's offer. He was told he would spend the afternoon providing blind support to the cryptography division, an elite group of mathematical brainiacs known as the Code Breakers. For the first hour, the cryptographers seemed unaware Becker was even there. They hovered around an enormous table and spoke of stream ciphers, self-decimated generators, knapsack variants, zero-knowledge protocols, unicity points. They scrawled symbols on graph paper, pored over computer printouts, and referred to the jumble of text on the overhead projector. Eventually, one of them explained that the scrambled text was a code, a ciphertext, groups of numbers and letters representing encrypted words. The cryptographer's job was to study the code and extract from it the original message, or clear text. The NSA had called Becker because they suspected the original message was written in Mandarin Chinese. For 2 hours, Becker interpreted an endless stream of symbols. But each time he gave them a translation, the cryptographers shook their heads in despair. The code was not making sense. Eager to help, Becker pointed out that all the characters had a common trait. They were also part of the kanji language. Becker explained that kanji was a Japanese writing system based on modified Chinese characters. He'd been giving Mandarin translations because that's what they'd asked for. Jesus Christ, the head codebreaker said. Let's try the kanji. Like magic, everything fell into place. When the code finally broke, Becker had no idea what dark secrets he'd helped reveal. But one thing was for certain. The NSA took code-breaking seriously. The check in Becker's pocket was more than an entire month's university salary. On his way back through the series of security checkpoints in the main corridor, Becker's exit was blocked by a guard. "Mr. Becker, wait here, please." "What's the problem?" Becker was running late for his standing Saturday afternoon squash match. The guard shrugged. "Head of crypto wants a word. She's on her way out now." 10 minutes later, Becker was in the NSA's commissary enjoying a popover and cranberry juice with the NSA's lovely head cryptographer, Susan Fletcher. Their courtship was slow and romantic. Stolen escapes whenever their schedules permitted, long walks through the Georgetown campus, late-night cappuccinos at Merludi's, lectures and concerts. Over dessert at all-night diners, Becker would ask endless questions. Where had she learned mathematics? How did she end up at the NSA? Susan explained that her interest in cryptography started in junior high school, when the president of the computer club had typed her a love poem encrypted with a number substitution scheme. Susan took the code home and carefully deciphered it. She watched in wonder as the seemingly random digits turned magically into beautiful poetry. In that instant, she knew she'd fallen in love. Codes and cryptography would become her life. Almost 20 years later, after getting her master's in mathematics from Johns Hopkins and studying number theory on a full scholarship from MIT, she submitted her doctoral thesis, Cryptographic Methods, Protocols, and Algorithms for Manual Applications. Shortly afterward, Susan received a phone call from the NSA. She underwent polygraph tests, a background search, handwriting analyses, and endless hours of interviews, including taped inquiries into her sexual orientation and practices. When the interviewer asked Susan if she'd ever engaged in sex with animals, she almost walked out. But somehow the mystery carried her through. Becker sat riveted by her stories. "They actually asked you if you'd had sex with animals?" Susan shrugged. "Part of the routine background check." "Well," Becker fought off a grin, "what did you say?" She kicked him under the table. "I told them no." Then she added, "And until last night, it was true." In Susan's eyes, David was as close to perfect as she could imagine. He was compassionate, smart, funny, and best of all, he had a sincere interest in her work. What David heard about the NSA enthralled him. Founded by President Truman at 12:01 a.m. on November 4, 1952, the NSA had been the most clandestine intelligence agency in the world for almost 50 years. The NSA's 7-page inception doctrine laid out a very concise agenda: to protect U.S. government communications and to intercept the communications of foreign powers. Susan told David about COMINT, the agency's Global Reconnaissance Division, a mind-boggling collection of listening posts, satellites, spies, and wiretaps around the globe. Thousands of communiques and conversations were intercepted every day, and they were all sent to the NSA's analysts for decryption. The FBI, CIA, and U.S. foreign policy advisors all depended on the NSA's intelligence to make their decisions. "And code breaking? Where do you fit in?" Becker asked. Susan explained how the intercepted transmissions often originated from dangerous governments, hostile factions, and terrorist groups, many of whom were inside U.S. borders. Their communications were usually encoded for secrecy in case they ended up in the wrong hands, which, thanks to comment, they usually did. Susan told David her job was to study the codes, break them by hand, and furnish the NSA with the deciphered messages. This was not entirely true. A few years ago it would have been accurate, but the world of cryptography had changed. Susan's new duties were classified, even to many in the highest echelons of power. Codes, Becker said. How do you know where to start? I mean, how do you break them? You of all people should know. It's like studying a foreign language. At first, the text looks like gibberish, but as you learn the rules defining its structure, you can start to extract meaning. Caesar, she explained, was the first code writer in history. When his foot messengers started getting ambushed and his secret communiques stolen, he devised a rudimentary way to encrypt his directives. He rearranged the text of his messages such that the correspondence looked senseless. Of course, it was not. Each message always had a letter count that was a perfect square, 16, 25, 100, depending on how much Caesar needed to say. He secretly informed his officers that when a random message arrived, they should transcribe the text into a square grid. If they did, and read top to bottom, a secret message would magically appear. One night, at a university performance of the Nutcracker, Susan gave David his first basic code to break. He sat through the entire intermission puzzling over the 11-letter message. HL FKZC VD LDS. Just as the lights dimmed for the second half, he got it. Susan had simply replaced each letter of her message with the letter preceding it in the alphabet. To decrypt the code, all Becker had to do was shift each letter one space forward in the alphabet. A became B, B became C, and so on. He quickly shifted the remaining letters. He never imagined 4 little syllables could make him so happy. I'm glad we met. He quickly scrawled his response and handed it to her. LDSNN. Me too. Susan read it and beamed. They'd been together almost 2 years when David proposed on a weekend trip to the Smoky Mountains. They were lying on a big canopy bed at Stone Manor. He had no ring. He just blurted it out. Susan kissed him long and hard. He took her in his arms and slipped off her nightgown. I'll take that as a yes, he said. That magical evening had been 6 months ago, before David's unexpected promotion to chairman of the Modern Language Department. Their relationship had been in a downhill slide ever since. The crypto door beeped once, waking Susan from her depressing reverie. She gathered her thoughts and stepped through the opening. Although she had practically lived in crypto since its completion 3 years ago, the sight of it still amazed her. The main room was an enormous circular chamber that rose 5 stories. Its transparent domed ceiling towered 120 feet at its central peak. The plexiglass cupola was embedded with a polycarbonate mesh, a protective web capable of withstanding a 2-megaton blast. Pushing through the center of the floor like the tip of a colossal torpedo was the machine for which the dome had been built. Its sleek black contour arched 23 feet in the air before plunging back into the floor below. Curved and smooth, it was as if an enormous killer whale had been frozen mid-breach in a frigid sea. This was Translator, the single most expensive piece of computing equipment in the world, a machine the NSA swore did not exist. Like an iceberg, the machine hid 90% of its mass and power deep beneath the surface. Its secret was locked in a ceramic silo that went 6 stories straight down, a rocket-like hull surrounded by a winding maze of catwalks, cables, and hissing exhaust from the Freon cooling system. The power generators at the bottom droned in a perpetual low-frequency hum that gave